Hey, everybody. Welcome to Coffee Time at the Water's Edge. We're so glad that you decided to join us this morning. Hang with us, grab a cup of coffee as we discuss Harrison Butker's controversial commencement speech. Hey, everybody. Welcome back once again to Coffee Time at the Water's Edge. I have our co-host with me, Dr. Kevin Newman.
Hello.
And I got the Mad Hatter, Pastor Adam Rastetter.
Hello, guys. What's up, everybody? The Mad Hatter.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Harrison Butker's controversial commencement speech. But before we get into that, let's introduce our coffee for this week.
All right. Today's coffee, we have a coffee that is an African coffee. So Rodney tells us it's a little bit fruity. Has a bit of a fruity taste to it. Looking forward to this. This is from the fellow drops, and it's the Demani AA brand, and it's a Unity brand. So looking forward to trying this one. You guys ready?
Yep,
sure.
Let's go.
Cheers, mates.
Cheers.
Cheers. Definitely African.
I like it.
It's good.
Good.
African coffee. I like it.
I like
good.
I like.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're probably late to the YouTube party on this, which we often are because we're not a reaction channel. But this is still being talked about quite a bit. This commencement speech that Harrison Butker gave at Benedictine College back just a few weeks ago. I have a copy of the entire speech, but he spoke about a number of topics. The topic that garnered, I think, the most attention was his comments directed towards the women who were graduating,
Right.
which ironically received a standing ovation at the commencement itself, but was certainly latched onto by many critics and, he got roasted for it. A lot of support for him, and then certainly a lot of critics came out of the woodworks on there. Have you guys listened to the whole speech?
I have, yeah.
I have, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he covers a variety of topics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He speaks about a number of things. He speaks about the dignity of life, masculinity, motherhood. Those are the ones that gets a lot of comments. He talks about sort of LGBTQ issues. He speaks about leadership. He calls out Catholic priests.
Yes.
So remember, this is a Harrison Butker. If you've been living under a rock and you don't know who he is by this point, he's a field goal kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah. Maybe the best kicker in the league. Like
he's good.
I would take him.
I wouldn't say he's the best.
I would take him.
He was on my fantasy team. I had him on my fantasy team, so he was pretty darn good.
I root for the Ravens. They have Justin Tucker.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. He's the OG. He's the OG. Yep. All right. So, but he's a field goal kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs.
He is good.
Very outspoken Catholic. And so just to frame this is a Catholic man speaking at a private Catholic college, promoting very traditional Catholic values.
Yes.
That's the context of this event, who's speaking, the audience that he's speaking to. And yet, when it goes to YouTube, goes viral, obviously a lot of people who are not Catholic, who don't share those values, have a lot to say about it.
Right.
All right, so maybe I'll read the comments that kind of spark the controversy, and then we can dabble around through other parts of it if we wish. But he specifically mentions, at one point, he speaks to men and women. Sorry, it's in multiple pages here, so I'm flipping through. To women. There's a point in the speech where he turns his attention and he says, "For the ladies present today, congratulations on an amazing accomplishment. You should be proud of all that you have achieved to this point in your young lives. I want to speak directly to you briefly because I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you. How many of you sitting here now are about to cross this stage and are thinking about all the promotions and titles you are going to get in your career? Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. I'm on the stage today and able to be the man I am because I have a wife who leans into her vocation. I remember he got really emotional. If you watch the speech, he's in tears at this point, I believe. I'm beyond blessed with the many talents God has given me, but it cannot be overstated that all of my success is made possible because a girl I met in band class back in middle school would convert to the faith, become my wife, and embrace one of the most important titles of all, homemaker. And then the audience erupts, and so there's applause that takes applause that lasts for 18 seconds. It says in the transcript, and he goes on to say, she's the primary educator to our children. She is the one who ensures I never let football or my business become a distraction from that of a husband and a father. She is the person that knows me best at my core, and it is through our marriage, Lord willing, we will both attain salvation. I say all this to you because I've seen it firsthand how much happier someone can be when they disregard the outside noise and move closer and closer to God's will in their life. Isabel's dream of having a career might not have come true, but if you asked her today if she had any regrets on her decision, she would laugh out loud without hesitation and say, heck no. I'll kind of pause there, but that's he goes on just to speak a little bit more about it, and then he'll turn his attention to the men there. But I think a lot of people, from a worldly perspective, they hear that, and you have these women that are about to graduate. They've spent 4 years, presumably, in their education, and the critics would say, well, he's just sort of throwing all of that away and just saying this doesn't really matter. What really matters is your role here and here as a wife and as a mother. So general thoughts, what has been your interaction? What have you heard about this? There's a whole lot of stuff swirling around, but just kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think that honestly, when I was listening to this, I didn't even realize what the main reaction was. But this would not have been high on my radar of the things that he said, just the way he went into some of the Catholic leadership and some of the other things that are maybe we'll talk about. He was calling out a lot of things. So I think this, though, the reaction is really, I would say, they're not quite hearing or understanding exactly what he's saying, because I think a lot of the reaction is like, oh, women aren't meant to be in the workplace, and he's not saying that. He's saying, what, there's the lie that you've been told is that that's where your greatest fulfillment's going to be, that if you're really going to do well in life, this is the path you need to take. You don't need to have. I think there's just culturally we're conditioned to think, that women don't need a man. They can do anything we can do. They can, and so he's trying to show this beautiful picture of marriage, and that not only that a woman has such a wonderful responsibility within the home as a mother, but also as a father. Like he wasn't only speaking to women. He spoke to the women there, but he also talked about absentee fathers, talked about the responsibility, just even his own responsibility in the home, that his career, a lucrative career as an NFL player, that his role as father is more important.
Yeah. I guess what, and I agree with everything that Adam said. But I guess what got me is that as I read and I listened to this speech, there were so many things that people could have jumped on. In the very beginning, without mentioning him by name, he refers to President Biden and the COVID situation, and how that derailed a lot of people, and how Biden did the sign of the cross at an abortion rally. And as you said, he really, for lack of a better phrase, railed on Catholic priests and bishops, as he used the phrase over and over, to stay in their lane, to do what their calling is and to find their identity in that. And again, the idea of fathers staying in the home. And yet, this is what people harp on. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, couldn't they have come out and said, hey, you're not right to condemn our president in the way that you did? Mm-hmm. But nobody said that. I don't think anybody can go back and say that COVID was handled properly, from the government perspective, or that, President Biden is the diehard Catholic that he claims to be, and didn't hear any noise from the Roman Catholic Church or even from the Pope, himself, about all that he said about that hierarchy. And nobody came out and said anything about his wording to the men and how important it is to stay home. And so, that's what strikes me. It's almost like, to my mind, they wanted to find something, and this is what they found, that the greatest majority of people would get behind and condemn him for. And, just this last week, he came out and basically said, I don't apologize for what I said. I stand behind what I said. And I had to appreciate that, because too many people today, the first sign of criticism, they're offering apologies up and down. And he wouldn't do that.
Yeah, the response is very interesting. So I do want to talk about some of the reactions and some of the things the NFL has said, the commissioner himself had said, even Coach Andy Reid of the Chiefs. I like actually his comments were kind of comical. And I think I would venture to say you guys agreed with probably most of what he was saying in this speech.
Yeah.
In the section that's most controversial that we're talking about on women, I probably would have worded at least a sentence or two differently. And I think the only thing that didn't, I agreed with the statement. He's promoting like the dignity of being a homemaker. Like we've somehow made that like a woman is less than if she doesn't have this high profile career, right, and if she's just a stay at home mom. And yet he's uplifting, and I think many Americans are starting to see this, and I'm loving the resurgence of sort of the traditional values,
absolutely,
in the church, and even outside of the church, you're seeing these trends. But when he said his wife's life didn't begin until she became a wife, and I probably would have worded that differently. I don't know if he meant it that way.
Her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and mother.
Yeah, I think the issue that I'm not offended at all by that, but I think what I thought of was, what about women who do not get married? Are they somehow not living life to its full? That may be called to singleness, right? And even within the Catholic Church, I think there was a statement by some nuns that were associated with the college, said some things, but also were barren, unable to have children, And so I just think, I'm not sure I would say life begins with those things, but his overall emphasis of trying to uphold the dignity of that is certainly commendable, I think.
Right. And, I've got to appreciate the way that he worded things in the first section when he said, some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world. And he doesn't condemn that. He just says, hey, some of you, this is what you're going to do. And the impression is that's okay. But he says, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you'll bring into this world.
Yeah.
And it's that got him labeled a misogynist. And, I can tell you, having been in higher education, biblical higher education for a number of years now, there is a running joke at most Bible colleges and Christian colleges, and it can go anywhere from, well, a ring by spring or your money back, or, she's here to get her MRS degree. And to me, they only say that because there is no MR degree, for the man. He's going to be Mr. whether he's married or not. But I can tell you there's a lot more desperate guys out there than girls, So,
and I think what you just quoted there, I think many people agree with that. I mean, I think that is probably the more popular opinion of people within the country. That and I think we see that just that his jersey sold out. You can't get his jersey. I think it was the second highest jersey, and the only reason it wasn't first was because it sold out.
And not just jerseys, but jerseys made for women.
Yeah, women's jerseys as well. Right. So not, yeah. So I think many people share his values and beliefs and the way, but I think it's the loudest voices sometimes come from the media and academia and all the the liberal leaning, the way that they paint this is that, oh, nobody thinks that he's out there on a limb, but honestly,
and I think the question I would want to ask is, do you think a career is more important than a family,
right?
Than your husband and your children,
right?
Like, are you wanting to actually say that,
right? And most people would not.
Maybe not verbalize it, but actions show like that's what's valued more than being a stay-at-home mom. And I think that is, it's sad. It's sad that we're sort of at a place there, but I do love the positive response that there's been to on this topic.
Yeah, and I can tell you from my own personal life, my wife feels this way, that being a wife and a mother is her highest calling. And I praise God for that, because she has enabled me to, in wherever God has taken me, whatever God has given me to do. If it hadn't been for her support and her ability to be a wife and a mother, so for years when I was pastoring full-time and teaching part-time, she was the one that on Sunday mornings took care of the kids. And all I had to do was dress myself and get my heart and mind right for the Sunday morning service and message. And she knew how important it was to me to get in that zone, if you will, and not be distracted by all the little things, little kids, screaming or whatever. And she took care of that. And that was such a blessing to me.
Yeah.
So
some of the reactions, the NFL came out with a statement. They said Harrison Butker, this is the quote here, gave a speech in his personal capacity. His views are not those of the NFL as an organization. The NFL is steadfast in our commitment to inclusion, which only makes our league stronger. It's because he made a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion there. And then you'd mentioned Roger Goodell kind of walking that back a little bit. He actually was saying that he was declining to comment further on it, but in his explanation of declining to comment further, he ends up sort of walking it back a little bit, because he says, we have over 3,000 players, which is true. It's like you're not going to agree with everything everybody says.
Sure.
He says we have over 3,000 players. We have executives around the league that have a diversity of opinions and thoughts, just like America does. I think that's something that we treasure, and that's part of, I think, ultimately what makes us as a society better. So he's kind of arguing for free speech here. But I think that sounds a lot different than we disagree with him.
Right.
These are not our views as an organization. And then Goodell's like, we don't, everybody, you're free to think what you want, and you have freedom of speech. You can espouse those ideas.
Right.
But I think he was also, I think he was being wise businessman here too, in that because of the backlash the NFL started getting. Right. There was a petition that was started on change.org that I think it had 190,000 in its first couple of days. People wanting for the Chiefs to release him. It has over 227,000 signatures now. A couple titles from USA Today articles. Petition calls for Christ to dismiss the Chiefs to dismiss Butker. Another one said Harrison Butker's jersey ranks among most popular on NFL Shop after the controversial speech. Right. So it was funny that his among the Chiefs, he was the top seller, which this is Super Bowl champions. They got Patrick Mahomes, multiple-time MVP, Super Bowl MVP, best maybe one of the best to ever do it by the end for sure. Travis Kelce, superstar, right? So you have these big names, and he's outselling them and of the top among all of them. So it has been interesting, the response.
The way some of his teammates came and just said, you know what, I may not agree with everything he said, but I know this guy, and he is an upstanding individual. He's a good example, just loves his family, great teammate. So it's great, that a Christian is out there. He's not just in word saying the right things, but he's living it.
And that's what struck me is that, his teammates came out, like you said, and say, hey, this is a man of character.
Yeah.
He is a blessing to have in the locker room. And, what a compliment to give to him that Adam, like you said, he's living it out in his daily life. And, and Steve, as you said, I mean, he's voicing his opinion. I don't agree with all of his theology here, obviously, but that's not what we're talking about today. But, his stance on the family, I've got to believe that. And even to a certain extent, how he was talking about the ministry, not necessarily priests, but others who need to identify with who they are in Christ and the gifting that they've been given, and stay in that lane.
That's what I mean. You think about just the Catholics, and we differ, and we don't worship Mary and pray, and it's the saints and things like that. But there's many ways we can link arms, with the Catholics, and many of those things are the things that he mentioned. Just that they're Christians too. Many of the devout ones, like a guy like Butker. I mean, very, very impressed to hear him speak.
Yeah. I loved Andy Reid as coach because a reporter tried to bait him in a conference, and the reporter baited him with this question. He was like, "Coach Reid, what are you going to do? And there's women that work in this organization. If they come to you and they're like, Harrison's been speaking. What did they say? Ill of women. That he's been speaking ill of women." And he was like, Andy Reid's like, "Well, I don't think you did speak ill of women," but he was like, he said, "I don't agree with you, and I let you in this room." That's right. There's a lot of things you believe that I don't agree with, and you're here, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, where did disagreement become like this test of I can't have anything to do with you if we disagree on anything, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at as a society. It's
we are.
Like people calling for, is this a fireable defense to have traditional values? Like it's just
crazy, right?
It's wild that we call for that.
Speaking at a Catholic college. I mean, the audience that he was speaking to, there's no way that and it just shows some of the reaction, people calling him names and really going after him. And many of those people are the same ones that preach tolerance.
Right.
And they're the least tolerant. And,
and I just think the reaction, at the end of the speech, if you watched it, he got a standing ovation, and yet our own president has spoken at a couple of different colleges, and during his speech, people have gotten up and turned their backs on him or walked out of the auditorium. And it's like, compare the reactions. And the audience was different, but those who invited him knew what they were doing, and they knew what they were getting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to read some of his comments to the men. Because we talked about how he did not just address women in the home, but even men, and the absence of men in the home and how that has plagued society. He says, to the gentlemen here today, part of what plagues our society is this lie that has been told to you that men are not necessary in the home or in our communities. He's talking about like stepping up and leading in these areas.
Right.
As men, we set the tone of our culture. And when that is absent, disorder, dysfunction, and chaos set in. This absence of men in the home is what plays a large role in the violence we see all around the nation. Other countries do not have nearly the same absentee father rates as we find here in the U.S., and a correlation could be made in their drastically lower violence rates as well. And he tells them, this is also what people don't like, be unapologetic, he says, in your masculinity, fighting against the cultural emasculation of men. Do hard things. Never settle for what is easy. You might have a talent that you don't necessarily enjoy, but if it glorifies God, maybe you should lean into that over something that you might think suits you better. I speak from experience as an introvert, he says, who now finds myself as an amateur public speaker and an entrepreneur, something I never thought I'd be when I received my industrial engineering degree. But he wants to speak to men too. It's like, I think he sees as a whole sort of there's generational gap here. And when you have kids being raised up without parents that are committed, who are raising them, and they're not being raised outside of the home in some other setting, right, through a combination of school and childcare, et cetera. He's saying we need to prioritize raising our families. And the men have a huge part to play in that, too. He's not just letting men off the hook, like, women, you stay home, take care of the kids, we'll go out and do this. That's not what he's saying at all.
Right.
And I think that's kind of how it was perceived, for sure.
And again, I love the way that he worded this by saying that, when he's talking about absentee father rates as we find here in the U.S., and a correlation could be made in their drastically lower violence rates as well. And I appreciate the fact that he doesn't just go out and say, okay, father's not in the home, more violence, which studies have shown to be the case, but he says there's a correlation, not necessarily a direct connection. And so from a logical point of view, he expresses this in a very excellent manner. Mm-hmm. And yet still, people get upset and say, oh, you can't say that.
Yeah, where we should actually be more upset of the fact that so many kids are being raised without fathers in the home.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, isn't that the greater the greater issue for these women are unfortunately having to fulfill the role of both parents, and that should be an outrage.
It should
in society.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I remember a conversation I had with, I believe it was with Carrie and Kathleen. I don't remember if it was when we recorded for Coffee Time. It might have been when we were promoting Kathleen's show, the Tea Time at the Women's Podcast. But it could be that. My memory's foggy on this. But I remember us talking about Proverbs 31 woman. Mm-hmm. And when you view all of the things said about the Proverbs 31 woman, like, she certainly had successful business ventures,
right, and
money-making ventures, and was entrepreneurial and all of these things. But her preference was given towards the home.
Yes.
And I want to say, I believe that's what Harrison was trying to communicate. You may have a career, and that's okay. He's not saying don't have a career, but don't neglect your home in that process, because you will regret it.
Right.
You will regret that. Mm-hmm. In your marriage and in your kids as they're raised by others. And I understand, it is very difficult in our day to live off a single income. Mm-hmm. And people were criticizing him for that. It's easy for an NFL player to say that. League minimum's like $1 million a year. I don't know what it is. It's a lot. Yeah. And he's a good player, right? So he makes a substantial amount of money. And not every home is capable of that. Yet, sometimes you either make sacrifices or you try to figure it out. Like Lisa and I have always figured it out a way for her to give preference to the home. She's worked most of the time, but not always. But we've been able to do that in a way where we don't have someone else raising our kids.
Right.
And I think that's been, I think every couple has to wrestle through that and has to think through what's best for us, what's best for our children. And I want to believe that's what he's promoting here.
That's how I took it.
Yeah. And let me just throw out there that, he's making the point about women being home and cherishing being a wife and a mother. But he also brings out the point when he talks about his vocation. And he describes his vocation as a husband and father. He doesn't refer to himself as a professional football player.
ever, I don't think.
No,
Yeah.
but except that that's given him a platform to speak. But, and I would say that the idea of keeping spouse and children first is just as important for men as it is for women. And I don't want anybody to get the idea, well, women should stay home, but men can go out and work, however much they want and be away from home. Nobody at the end of their life says, well, my one regret is that I didn't work enough and I was home with my family too much. It's always the opposite. I regret that I did all this out there, whether it's a career and in some cases even ministry, to the neglect of my wife and children.
Hey, I'm going to add to that. You said that it's just as important for men, but we also as church leaders need to remember that it's also, if we don't take care of the little church at home, how good are we at taking care of the big church?
Absolutely. Well, and that's biblical. Paul brings that out in Timothy and Titus. If you can't
manage your own household,
manage his house, then he certainly can't be a leader in the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen. Amen. Anything else?
Yeah, I would just say if you haven't listened to his speech, give it a listen. It's about 20 minutes. It's worth it, I think, to listen. And one of the things too that I just thought was the way that he talks, it's not necessarily out of a desire. Like he wasn't like they asked him, he didn't want to do it initially, and he was like, yeah. But he said, God has given me this platform, and he's going to be obedient and speak truth. And even just coming back and not shrinking back from anything that he said, and wanting to continue to affirm what he said. I mean, we should pray for this brother.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hard thing in this society, especially just in the NFL locker room and everything. I think it's definitely admirable that he stands up.
Think of all the conversation that is stimulated.
Yeah,
I mean, we're here doing a podcast about his speech, and who knows how many people will hear this, but then there's people with way bigger platforms that are having these conversations. It's in the news. It's all over the place. And so at the center of this really is a clash of values.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so is this a conversation that the Lord wants our country to have?
Right.
And I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, what is most important? Right.
Yeah.
Man.
He even talked about just surrounding yourselves with people who are going to build you up. And I mean, it was holy living. I mean, it was good. It was a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
So
Good.
yeah.
Last word?
Go Chiefs.
No.
I'm thinking about converting. He's my favorite player.
I might still have him on fantasy. He did well for me last year. But anyways.
Well, let's just hope he has a good year, because if he has a bad year this year, people are going to come
Easy
out
year
and
to
say,
fire him,
there
yeah.
you go. Hey, it's all because he said this.
Well, hey, God bless you guys. Thank you so much for hanging on, whether you're listening on Apple or on Spotify, or you're watching this on YouTube. We'd encourage you to subscribe if you haven't done that already, that you would do some whatever interaction that would look like if you're on a podcast platform, to leave us a review. If you're on YouTube, like this video, maybe share it with somebody. Have some good conversation within your home. I'd love to see men and women having these conversations about raising their family. What can we do to raise our families, right?
Amen.
And that may mean some an adjustment, for some couples.
Right.
And so, interact with it. Thank you for hanging with us. God bless you. Have a great day. Peace out.
God bless.